Hellcat.
Hello and welcome back to the channel where it's time for our regular Sunday Sega Saturn review. Today it's another racing game because there are quite a lot of racing games on the Saturn, I'm not going to lie. We did one in midweek and I'll put a link at the end of the video for Daytona USA's review, but today's is Cyber Speedway. It's another futuristic style racing game, pretty similar to Wipeout, that came out at the tail end of 1995, making it a pretty early 3D racer in the system, and I was genuinely surprised when I loaded this game up. I'm not going to spill the beans yet, but I was genuinely surprised. So the first surprise I had was seeing that there was actually a story mode on the main menu. I've not looked at the game before, but I didn't know that. There's free run mode and options as well. Options, pretty simplistic. You can assign the keys. There's 3 different configurations. It's not hard to play really. You've got audio, stereo, mono, and you've got your normal BGM test, your sound tests, and your course records as well. Free run mode. Heading in there, you can see that you've got 1-player single race versus the CPU, a 1 versus 2-player, it's obviously 2-player race, and then you've got time trial as well. But story mode is where the main beef of the game is at. So you can pick between standard and advanced. When you hit story mode, and I would always suggest going for standard to start with, and then you're met with a nice cheesy cutscene explaining the game's story.
To represent Earth at the Cyber Speedway. You know how important the races are. It's more civilized than all-out war. So when I win the right to race for Earth, my victories will guarantee prosperity for our planet. Why am I so confident? Well, last night...
There's no point pretending I was very surprised when I saw these cutscenes, because this was pretty uncommon for a racing game released in 1995, actually having a storyline that you're the pilot for Earth and you're going to try and represent Earth in the Cyber Speedway race. It was actually really interesting to see it. Obviously the cutscenes is literally just still images with the voice work over the top, but it genuinely surprised me and I was quite impressed with it, to be fair. Considering this was 1995, I don't really think there was anything in any other racing games like it, to be fair, not off the top of my head anyway, so it was a really interesting thing to see this at the start of the game.
When it's over, I'll be the driver representing Earth. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to get down to the briefing room to meet with Nod and Colonel Dopp once more before the race starts. Wish me luck.
So before each race in story mode, you're given a little loading screen kind of previewing what the course will be like before you're given these little snippets of cutscenes where you're spoken to by the man in charge of selecting the pilot, and then your technician dude, they kind of give you information about the race and sort of progress the story basically.
Allow me to welcome you to the planetary finals. The final test is a simple one. You will face one other driver, and all you'll need to do is defeat him.
So with all that out of the way, the best thing we can do is get on with talking about how this game looked, how it sounds, how it plays, what kind of lifespan you can expect to have from this game, and is it worth playing in this day and age. Now the second thing I was surprised at by this game was how decent it looked for the time it came out. Remember, it came out at the tail end of 1995. Now, I genuinely think this game looks good for its time. The courses look pretty decent. Your ships, they're not the most detailed, but they look okay. The game moves at a pretty consistent frame rate. I wouldn't say it's choppy or anything like that. And I actually think it's generally pretty decent to look at. Now, that doesn't mean it's not got faults and flaws, because it does. The pop-up is glitchy in the background, sort of comes in and then goes out sometimes. That is irritating. The second thing, the water effects on this game, they are naff. There's no point pretending they're not. They are naff. And the only other thing graphically is that when you're in a race with other ships, sometimes the computer ships disappear and reappear right in front of your face. That is a bit off-putting and can lead you to banging into them some of the times. The shadows on this game are just dark black, the kind that I prefer. They're not the horrible mesh effects. You do get some mesh effects, like I said, with the water transparency effects, if you want to call them that, in your missiles. But overall, for the time the game came out, it's not that bad looking in my opinion. I really don't think it is too bad of a looking game. Now, very rarely will I say a soundtrack plays as much a part in a game as the gameplay, but in this case, it really does, because the soundtrack for Cyber Speedway is nothing short of breathtaking. The band that did it have come up with just a bunch of tracks that are just absolutely fantastic to race around to. I just cannot fault the soundtrack for Cyber Speedway. Now, I know the American version, I think, has a different soundtrack, and I've listened to it, and it's definitely not as good. I feel sorry for them. But here over in the PAL region, we got left a simply stunning soundtrack, and the best thing I can do is just give you some examples of the music that you can find in-game. Now, the sound effects in the races are perfectly adequate as well. I cannot fault those whatsoever. The only issue with the sound is when there are cutscenes and the sound in the background behind the characters' voices is all muffled. So here's a little snippet of that. It's very similar to the Battle Arena Toshinden sounds I played a while back on that review. So just take a listen and I'm pretty sure you will notice.
Wow! I never thought I'd live long enough to see as strange a sky as here on Nubis. Now, this race is going to be tough, but I know you're up to it. I think the Calidasian Challenger is overconfident. You can use that against him.
Now, you can tweak your vehicle between races in the story mode, your engine, your steering, your braking, and your special choice when you've unlocked all three. They could be altered to slightly affect your speed, how stable you are, and how heavy or light your steering is and your braking. It doesn't have too much of an impact, but you definitely do notice it if you change between power and speed. And that moves on to how well does the game actually play. Now, in reviews at the time, this game was criticized for being not particularly good to play. And now, I actually think it plays perfectly fine, and it plays exactly how I would expect it to play and control. I genuinely think it plays better than Wipeout on the Saturn. I think it's more fun to play as well. There's no variety with the weapons and stuff. You literally just get missiles, whereas obviously Wipeout has more variety. It is slightly newer in all fairness. But in terms of the gameplay itself, it's great because it's got R and L are boosters, and they boost you to that side. So if you're going around a tight left turn, if you press L, you will get a slight boost to the left to help you turn. Same if you're going around a right turn, and these can be really useful as well. If you're trying to overtake somebody on a straight, you can boost to the right to get past them. I think these are absolutely a fantastic piece of gameplay implementation. I just can't fault that enough, and it just really works really well in the game. Generally, you know, it's a standard playing game. B's accelerate, and yeah, X, Y, and Z change your views, and C shoots your missile, and the D-pad steers you. All of that is standard, but having the boosters for right and left, that really is a fantastic addition to the gameplay, and I definitely think this game plays pretty well in all fairness. And those reviews at the time that said it played not particularly good and they don't handle like hovercrafts, I don't know what a hovercraft handles like. I've never driven one. I imagine pretty much everybody that's played a racing game has never driven a hovercraft. I think these vehicles handle like you'd expect them to. They're hovering off the ground, yes, but they're kind of like spaceships or something in the future. So I definitely think gameplay-wise it plays perfectly fine, and I can't really fault it too much. If you hit the sides, yes, it slows you down, but on this game the computer will hit the sides too, and they will slow down as well. Whereas on Wipeout, I felt the computer were much better at the game than you could possibly be. On this game, the computer makes mistakes as well, and that is something that appeals to me. So it is more realistic, I think. So gameplay-wise, I don't really fault this game. I actually think it plays well, and it is a pretty enjoyable game to play. So what kind of lifespan can you expect from Cyber Speedway? Now, I've said it's got one player single race, it's got time trial, it's got two player split screen, it's got a story mode. There are 11 tracks to access on different planets with 2 variations for most of them, other than the last track on the advanced setting in story mode. So definitely scope and variety there, and the tracks are all varied, they definitely are, and they are all completely unique, and that is a fantastic thing. Cyber Speedway though suffers because you cannot save data on this game unless there is a secret way to save it that I am completely unaware of. You cannot save your data, so when you do story mode you have to do it in one go. Now that's not really a problem, it probably only takes 20 minutes or so to get through the story mode on easy, and a couple of minutes extra because of the additional race on the advanced setting, so that's not a problem. But for me, not being able to save your high scores on time trial is kind of a killer for a racing game, to be fair, especially early on in the life of consoles. I think coming back to time trial race scores, and times I should say, was a big thing back then, so you're just resetting them every time you turn the game off, and that is a bit of a downer. Moving on to the other thing, the 2-player split screen. You would think this is a great addition, but unfortunately in Cyber Speedway, 2-player split screen suffers massive slowdown in the gameplay. The game, to me, feels like it runs at quite literally half the speed, so that sense of speed that you have in the 1-player game, and it's pretty great, I'm not going to lie, is massively diminished in 2-player mode. I wouldn't really say the pop-up and the graphical performance is much worse. It's the fact the game runs at such a slower speed, it kills the enjoyment, and I wouldn't really say this is the kind of game that you're going to impress your mates with, even if it did have 2-player back then, because it's not actually that great. There's only you and the one other car, I should say, vehicle on the track. There's no CPU controlled vehicles as well, so that's a bit of a downer too. So yes, it has 2-player mode, but it's not really a great addition. So longevity, it's probably not got it. Once you've done story mode in easier and the advanced settings, it hasn't really got a lot to come back to, unfortunately. So, as always, the big question is this game worth playing nowadays? And thankfully, I can say it was a genuine surprise, and I genuinely enjoyed my time playing it. So I would say yes, especially if you're used to Wipeout, then this is something different. It's a similar style, but it is different, and it's more enjoyable, and it's got such a fantastic soundtrack as well. I can't fault it. I'd probably buy the game just for that. You're probably looking at about £15 to buy this game, but to be fair, I've found relative enjoyment from it, and I wouldn't say that's a big price for this, to be fair. A lot of people might slam this game. I'll stick up some reviews of what it got at the time on the screen now so you can see for yourself, but I'd definitely give it a pretty decent score if I was going to rate it out of 100. I definitely think it's worth playing. It's enjoyable. It's not the most polished game. It's the kind of game that if it came out 2 years later in the Saturn's lifespan, I genuinely feel it would be right up there as one of the best racing games on the system. Not bothered what anybody else says about it. This is my opinion as always, and I definitely think it's a decent game and well worth playing. So, does Cyber Speedway hit the top 10? The answer is yes. Yes, it does. It comes in at number 10, right at the bottom. So there it is, number 10. That's not saying it's a bad thing, that's a pretty good thing. So we've got some good games on here. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is the top 10 at the moment. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again next week for another Sat review. Goodbye for now.